Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible, verse by verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're currently in Genesis chapter 35, and we're moving along with Jacob's journey. And last time he had journeyed, settled in Shechem, in a town that God did not necessarily tell him to settle in. He told him to go. He told Jacob to go back to his land, and he settled here. And as a result, we saw the rape of his daughter Dinah, and then the brutal killing by Simeon and Levi. We're going to continue on in this chapter here, and as he returns, there's going to be some tragedy in this chapter. It's going to be some tragedy in this chapter, and let's get into it. This is after, of course, the incident with Dinah. So verse 1 says, God said to Jacob, get up and go to Bethel and settle there. In other words, that's where God told him to originally go. He said, build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Remember, 20 years ago, he had fled, and this is where the famous stairway to heaven, or Jacob's ladder, as it's kind of known, he appeared, and God had promised him he would be with him. And now God is saying, okay, go back. 20 years had passed. And so God is telling him now, go back and build an altar there. Verse 2, so Jacob said to his family and all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourselves, change your clothes. We must get up and go to Bethel. I will build an altar there to the God who answered me in my days of distress. He has been with me everywhere I have gone. Then they gave Jacob all their foreign gods and their earrings, and Jacob hid them under an oak near Shechem. And when they had set out, a terror from God came over the cities around them, and they did not pursue Jacob's son. Now this is interesting here. This is interesting. I want you to note something here. Now, and I'm saying this as we move through the Bible, because we don't always get this unless we get it in little snippets, okay? Because sometimes we wonder, well, why did God allow this? Why did God do this? But I want you to notice something here. Now, we saw this as they're getting ready to really now move forward. Jacob makes an astounding statement to me. He says, get rid of your foreign gods. Well, wait a minute. I thought they've already done that. In other words, seeing the God of Abraham and Isaac, I thought they've already done that. And we also remember that Rachel, when they made their journey out, stole Laban's foreign gods, pagan gods, the carved images, right? In which he was upset about that, right? But then Rachel, now I said before, that even though Jacob loved Rachel, she wasn't the most godly one of his wives. And that shows it. And now, as they are now moving forward, he tells them, okay, put all of the foreign gods, no more worshiping of the foreign gods, which means they had them and he knew about it. That's interesting. Even though, yes, he only worshiped God, but they still knew, kind of allowed all of people within his camp to have these foreign gods. So as a result, they gave up all of their foreign gods. That's kind of amazing to me that this happened. And again, notice this, and this should have been something that the future descendants should have taken heart in, that God put the terror, the fear of God around them, that they wouldn't pursue him. They would never learn this lesson too. Israel would never learn this lesson. And remember, even when God promised Jacob, he never learned this lesson, that I'm going to be with you. In other words, Jacob should have said, you know what, I'm not going to fear Esau, I'm not going to fear Laban. But frailty of human. Let's see here. Verse 7. Jacob built an altar there. Oh, one other thing is too, he takes all of the foreign gods and he leaves them in Shechem. And you could almost say that he's leaving behind the heartaches, right? The heartaches that come from, let's say, an ungodly pursuit, stopping there in Shechem in the first place. All the foreign gods he leaves in Shechem. Verse 7, Jacob built an altar there and called the place the God of Bethel, because it was there God had revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. And Deborah, the one who had nursed and raised Rebekah, died and was buried under the oak south of Bethel. So Jacob named the oak of weeping. Now I want to kind of mention something here, and that is Rebekah's nurse. Now this is kind of interjected here. And there's a couple of things that's kind of funny or interesting. Let me find it again. I'm at the wrong one. Let me go back. Let's see. Oh, okay. Verse 8. Deborah, the one who had nursed and raised Rebekah, died and was buried under the oak south of Bethel. So Jacob named it oak of the weeping. I'm sorry. Here's the interesting thing. Why is she mentioned, right? In other words, we don't know anything about her, and so why is she there? And of course, the text doesn't give us an answer. So some have thought maybe Rebekah, the mother, Jacob's mother, sent her. Again, it's just odd. We don't know why she's mentioned here, other than the fact that she is mentioned. She's with Jacob on his way as he's returning back. So that's just kind of interesting. We don't have a lot of information, so I'm gonna keep going on. But it's just interesting. She's mentioned here. There are 3 deaths that's going to take place in this chapter. So she becomes the first one, and so she's mentioned. And I don't know. Again, a wild thought, and I don't want to even really entertain it because the Bible really does not give us an answer to this. Is this an indication of Rebekah's death? But we're not told when Rebekah dies. We're only going to be told that she died because she's buried with Isaac. But anyway, let's go on. So verse 9, God appeared to Jacob again after he returned from Paddan Aram, and he blessed him and said, and he blessed him and said, God said to him, your name is Jacob. You will no longer be named Jacob, but your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. Now, we saw this already with the when they were wrestling, when he was coming on his way here. So God kind of reinforced it again. If you want to say, why is God saying it twice? Oftentimes they would do that. Speak things twice to ensure, or it was a way of saying, okay, yes, authentically I'm speaking. So they would say, Jacob, Jacob, right? And he would say, here I am, here I am. Saying the things twice was emphasizing or reinforcing, yes, this is what we're saying. Anyway, he says to Jacob, he calls him Israel. Verse 11, God also said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation, indeed an assembly of nations, will come from you, and kings will descend from you, and I will give you the land that I gave Abraham and Isaac, and I will give the land to your future descendants. And then God withdrew. I'm going to kind of go back and say something right here. Notice he says, the nations, an assembly of nations. That comes through the seed, which is Christ. Okay, that comes through the seed, which is Christ. He says, then God withdrew from him at the place where he had spoken to him. And Jacob set up a marker at the place where he had spoken to him, a stone marker. He poured a drink offering on it and anointed it with oil. And Jacob named the place that God had spoken to him Bethel. Now, some people want to make sometimes kind of an issue out of the name Bethel. Should the church be named Bethel or whatever? It's just simply a name that Jacob named the place where God met with him. All right. Verse 16, they set out from Bethel, and when they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth. Right? So we even know she was pregnant, but obviously she got pregnant along the way here. Rachel began to give birth, and her labor was difficult. And during her difficult labor, the midwife said to her, don't be afraid, for you will have another son. And with her last breath, for she was dying, she named him Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Now, of course, besides this being sad, because, here you see Benjamin would never know his mother. Jacob was a young at the time. And, but I want you to take note of something that, notice where he buries Rachel. And I say that because, remember, he loved Rachel. Leah was unloaded on him, right? Leah was not loved. Leah was not wanted. Jacob worked intensely. Actually, Jacob worked 14 years for Rachel. He loved Rachel. But as I said before, Rachel wasn't a godly person. And because she wasn't a godly person, think about it, she was more pagan. And what's interesting here is that as she dies, he buries. And of course, they just did that all the time. Funerals were very quick. They didn't, unless you were rich and or in politics or the rulers, you didn't, that they would mourn. We're going to see later on. They had embalming techniques, but the average person did not have that. So if you died, you was usually buried that day, because the decomposing process would start immediately when you die. And depending on the temperature and all that, it could even speed it up. So funerals and burials were usually the same day. Not like today when they said, okay, so-and-so died, and let's tell everybody, we're going to give everybody a week, 2 weeks, whatever to come. No, usually we buried the same day. But what is going to be interesting is that she's buried on the side of the road. She is not buried in the tomb of Abraham that Abraham bought. And what we're going to later see is that Abraham and Sarah was born there, buried there. Not Abraham, and remember Keturah, his second wife. She wasn't born there. She was buried, whatever, and actually sent off, right, with the other kids. And then we're going to see that Isaac and Rebekah is buried there. But Rachel is not buried there, and that's interesting. She's buried on the side of the road. And this is why I say that in her death, in a sense, God honors Leah. Okay? God honors Leah. All right, verse 20. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath at Bethlehem. Jacob set up a mark on his grave, and it was a marker that Rachel graved to this day. Of course, to this day, which day he's referring to, depending on who's writing this book. Okay. Verse 21. Israel set out again and pitched the tent beyond the tower of Adar. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah. And Israel heard about it. And then it's, okay. Now, you can see Jacob here basically was very, very kind of, right? He just heard about it. But you can see how ruthless, how trifling his sons were. So Reuben, the firstborn, sleeps with Jacob's concubine or slave. Actually, she's not a concubine. She was actually a slave. Now, you also remember that she was one of the mothers of the 12 tribes. So, of course, Reuben violated a whole bunch of stuff, right? Code and morals. So one, he sleeps with his father's wife. He sleeps then with his brother's mother. Okay. But again, we see during this period of time that they were scoundrels. The 12 tribes of Israel were scoundrels. All right. So he says, Jacob had 12 sons, verse 23. Leah's sons were Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. Now, he's not going to get that firstborn title because of this. Simeon and Levi, again, they were cruel, and Jacob's going to mention this. Judah, and coming up, we're going to see Judah is going to depart from his family for 20 years. We're going to read more about him. Now, Issachar, Zebulun, and then he says Rachel's sons were Joseph and Benjamin, and then the sons of Rachel's slave Bilhah were Dan and Naphtali. So that could be kind of awkward. Your brother slept with your mother. Then it says the sons of Leah's slaves Zilpah were Gad and Asher. These were the 12 sons of Israel. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. So this was, again, very, 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 very trifling children here. All right, verse 27. Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mar and Caritha Abra. I know I'm butchering these names. That is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years. I think I mispronounced this a few chapters back when I said Isaac lived 175 years. Abraham lived 175 years. Jacob lived 180 years. He said, then he took his last breath and died. He was gathered to his people, old and full of days. Then his sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. So we see Esau again. I do believe this might be the last time we see Esau here in terms of like they're together. But again, notice they are burying their father together. One other thing, and that is Esau. Remember the reason that that Jacob fled and was gone for 20 years is because his mother Rebekah cooked up a deceitful scheme because they thought that Isaac was going to die. And as we can see, he lived way beyond that point, okay, to actually 180 years. So he dies. Now we're going to see Jacob. And as Jacob, his journey, and then of course we're going to see what's going to happen over in the next few chapters. And from here to the end of Genesis, it's going to be very, very, very interesting. All right. I will see you in the next study. All right. See you next time.